Research is done in 2024 regarding the innovation readiness and capacity of large companies showed a worrying result. Although somewhere around 80% of executives claimed innovation to be top priority, only 3 to 5% were actually satisfied with the results. We are starting off 2025 with another report by Hype Innovation and Deloitte, showing that companies and executives now believe even stronger that if they don't succeed in innovation, their businesses are at high risk. As to the maturity of innovation in organizations, we continue to notice that leadership efforts are primarily centered on fostering culture, raising awareness, and in some cases recognizing innovators. Unfortunately, though, in very few companies, the leadership team establishes an innovation vision, strategy, and objectives. Even fewer provide structure, resources, accountability, or encourage experimentation, all these qualifying as actions that play a pivotal role in advancing innovation efforts. To tackle these issues, I have today with me Dan Palmer, a seasoned professional with experience in innovation strategy, launching new ventures, and helping global companies think like startups again. Dan started his career on Wall Street, where his employer was the first bank to collapse in the 2008 financial crisis. He spent 4 years on the exchange floor making markets in derivatives before transitioning to financial technology with the New York Stock Exchange. He is fascinated by all things startup related, and after getting his MBA, he joined a boutique consultancy to help some of the biggest businesses on the planet compete in a quickly changing competitive landscape. What we say about Dan is that he is an American living in Finland because he's currently working with ICG-Innotiimi, where he is on a mission to help Europe increase its innovation output and be recognized as the place to go for new products, services, and ideas. Dan, welcome to House of Innovation, a place with a similar mission because here we want to help Romanians, but also Europe, increase its innovation capacity and output. Very happy to have you here with me.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, you heard me mentioning and reading from the Hypes report and many others, and it would look like both you and I have a lot of work to do. However, companies seem reluctant to take the real step or real steps towards developing their capabilities to innovate. They rather seem stuck in operational efficiencies as a lifeline for their business. Now, I want to ask you, Dan, why innovation is more important now than ever before, and especially for businesses in Europe that are indeed struggling to compete with markets in US, China, Japan?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and there's a lot of reasons. Even to add to the statistics that you said earlier, something like 45% of CEOs don't expect their business model to last for 10 years. So in combination with those numbers, we're really looking at somewhere around 4 out of every 10 businesses are going to be gone. And a lot of that really has to do with the lack of innovation, the over focus on efficiency that seems to be kind of pervasive here in Europe. And I certainly get it. Efficiency is very important, but it also causes a situation where businesses start to become fragile. They're so optimized, and every last hour or euro or free moment is spent kind of chasing that 100% efficiency. And I think that's a serious problem because while efficiency is important, growth compounds. And so as we kind of enter into this new economy that we're finding through digital transformation first, and then, now we're looking at the impacts of AI, the idea behind, being optimally efficient is no longer the number one driver on whether or not your company is going to be successful, right? It really boils down to this idea of, are you able to adapt to changing circumstances? Are you able to reinvent your company? And the base of all of that is really, do you have the innovation necessary to change with the times.
Both of us have worked with startups, you in the United States, me in Europe. And although there are differences in how startups approach risks and can recover after a failure, there are things that they do have in common and that we both noticed about the behavior and mindset of people running such businesses. Now, except for those that never make it, yes, we know that maybe 7, 8, 9 out of 10 startups don't scale. Those that do can significantly comfort the business of the established companies, meaning that these startups, although they start out quite small, can very fast become disruptors for established organizations. Maybe not bankrupt them, but eat out of their market shares considerably. Now, then I would like to ask you, why do startups and how do startups manage to outcompete these established businesses? And how can companies learn from startups to secure their share of business in the future? Because I think there is very much and a lot of insights and a lot to learn from startups.
Yeah, there certainly is. I think that, startups, despite all of their challenges, have some inherent advantages to them. And one of the big ones is they have very little to lose, right? They can go out and try new and crazy ways, new business models, different ways of approaching markets, different channels, whatever. And they don't really have to worry about mistakes costing them customers because most startups don't really have any customers. And so what traditional businesses would see as an impediment to startups actually ends up kind of being one of their biggest strengths, right? They don't have this sunk cost fallacy because there's nothing that has been spent. Whether or not traditional businesses can emulate that is going to be a tricky one. It's going to require kind of a slight shift in mindset from company leadership, where instead of thinking about, what are the expected benefits, what is the return on investment for a particular project, it's more they need to kind of shift their mindset a little bit to say, how much can we afford to lose, right? It's setting aside a little bit of time, a little bit of money, and a few people, and saying, you know what, we can afford to have, Bob and Frank spend a couple hours a week developing what they want. Because it's really kind of allowing that acceptable loss, I would say, that will kind of free up these internal resources that I think a lot of companies have that they're just not utilizing. Also to that point, I think that, startups attract a certain type of person, and those are people who are really kind of comfortable with high risk environments. And so they're comfortable going out and trying these crazy ideas. You don't generally find that as much inside of corporations. There's probably a really good reason for it, but at the same time, that is kind of hamstringing them for the future, right? They're basically kind of really looking at, super small incremental innovations because people are afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of losing money, right? They don't want to make a decision that, costs them their yearly bonus. And so they're very risk averse. And it really ends up hurting businesses in the long run.
In the diffusion of innovation, we talk about the 2-3% of innovators that are out there when we refer to the customers. So we have the innovators, the early adopters, early market, and so on. I was studying a lot the topic of effectuation and how can companies become more entrepreneurial and how can they find those employees that are more entrepreneurial. And I also found a report that has been developed in many countries on many companies. And that report was actually showing that in each company, there is a pool of 2-3% of employees that are innovators or entrepreneurial or have this drive, have this capacity to execute in an environment of uncertainty. And on one hand, I found it really nice, so that what we see in the customer behavior, that we have the 2-3% of innovators, we also see it in companies, in organizations, but it's a matter of creating the space for them where they can have the freedom to execute and to try new things. So yes, maybe 2-3%, it's not enough, but I think it's encouraging to get things starting. Like you said, have Bob and Jane and 2 other people work on these ideas, wild ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any data on this, but I would have to think that, you know, the people inside that work inside of the corporation really kind of mirror just the general populace, right? So you're going to end up with, you know, a few percentage who are those, you know, innovators, or, you know, a few more percentage who are the early adopters. And it's kind of incumbent upon companies to really create some innovation infrastructure for these employees so that they have room to go out and do this. Some of that has to do with, you know, how do you align incentives, right? I think that traditionally businesses are very much focused on, we celebrate our wins, right? Things that go well, those are the ones that get called out by leadership. And that's fine. But we also need to take a step back and say, well, hey, what about the stuff that didn't work, right? And, you know, how do we go about recognizing that? How do we go about rewarding people for trying new things? Because even if something doesn't work, then that's at least a learning experience that someone in the company now has to say, hey, maybe this wasn't the right channel or the right market or the right product or the right service, right? But they went out, they tried their ideas on the market, they got feedback, and then the next time they do it, it'll be better, right? I think that there's this idea that once you establish the basic framework that companies need to be innovative, I think that honestly, leadership can kind of be very hands-off once it's in place and let people who are innovators go out and do their thing, and just providing them with the psychological safety and the recognition that they want and need as individuals. So that way, you know, they're inside of your company innovating, as opposed to getting upset and going off and having a startup and then competing against you in the future.
Mm-hmm. It's about the intelligent failures, as Amy Edmondson is calling them in her work on psychological safety. In my work and my experience, at first, when we were going to the executive team, to the steering committee, and telling them about the things that didn't work out, they tended to see those as mistakes. And there's a big difference between a mistake and a failure. I think mistakes are about the things that you could have avoided, but failure is about when you try something new with an intention and a plan, and that thing just doesn't work out. It's a proof that you shouldn't have gone into that direction. And I know that this is one of the struggles that many innovation teams or people that try to emulate innovation in the organizations have, proving that a failure is actually a win, can be a win for the organization, because you're saving time, money, and who knows what other investments you would have put into something that it's not worth pursuing. What I'm hearing from you is a lot about the mindset, like an innovator's mindset. And it's not enough to nurture the innovator's mindset only in the people that have this drive or have this natural, let's say, calling to feel good in an uncertain environment. I think this is something that we should help develop from top down. And in the US, now I'm coming back to you and the promised land, I believe that people are, or that's how I see them. They are more innovative, and they are not so risk adverse, and they like to try things. How do you teach? How do you explain to leaders? How do you help leaders develop this new mindset that is so important for innovation? Because in my opinion, and please tell me if I'm wrong, if the leadership team doesn't have this openness towards trying new things, it's very difficult to create an environment where other people will try.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I find that the way I talk about it here in Europe is significantly different from what I did in the US. Obviously, the US has very specific rules, which don't apply everywhere, right? But in the US, companies and people go bankrupt, and it's not that big of a deal. And so there's this kind of structural support of, hey, I went out and I tried something and it didn't work. And I can go through the court system, have my debts erased, and then I can try again, right? And I think that there are obviously some people who abuse it, but it also kind of gives you this incentive to say, you can go out and try something, and if something goes wrong, it's not the end of your economic life. The other kind of interesting issue, and as I said, the way I've changed talking about it here is in the US, I was selling the moon, right? The companies that I would talk to, it was, hey, we want growth. We want to focus on that top line number. We really want to go out and take over the market. Here in Europe, it's actually, I'm finding a much different thing that I'm talking about, even though I feel like it's the same thing. I'm not selling, it's no longer the carrot. Here in Europe, it's actually the stick of, if you don't innovate, your business is going to die. And we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but even though, efficiency funds your paycheck, innovation is going to fund your pension. And if you want to be around in 5, 10, 15, 20 years to be able to collect on that pension, you're going to have to learn how to adapt to a rapidly changing world. The other thing that seems to be somewhat effective here is the idea that disruption is coming, right? And I generally dislike using that word, but I can't think of another one at the moment that fit it. Disruption is going to come for every business, right? Whether it's going to be through AI or some new technology that someone's going to invent sometime over the weekend, we don't really know. If you're not in the position where you can react quickly and adapt to a new situation, your business is already dying. So, as far as the US being I think you called it the promised land, maybe it's really just an idea of people are less concerned about what did you do yesterday, and they're more concerned about what are you going to do tomorrow. And I think that kind of future-facing thought process is something that could be here in Europe. I think in certain aspects, Europeans do a lot of things better, whether we're talking about the environment or human rights or just economics in general, but they haven't really applied that to the business world yet, in my opinion.
I used to work with a startup, and the guy said, I'm going to the US. I'm moving my business to the United States because here, whenever I talk about my failures, I feel ashamed. People look at me and it's like they are saying, hey, loser. I feel like going to US, it's like you said, I can say, hey, I failed 10 times. Wow, congrats, guy. So it's a different attitude towards failure. I think structurally or culturally, it's different.
It definitely is, right? I mean, any failure that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think it's kind of a shame that in some places they look at the failure and think of it negatively, right? As an example, right? Think about how children learn how to walk, right? They don't just immediately put on their running shoes and go sprint a marathon. They take a few wobbly steps, they fall over, they hit their head, they cry a little bit, and then the next time they go a little bit farther. And I'd like to think about, business models or businesses in general as this process of learning of you take that first wobbly step, you may or may not crash. That's part of the process, right? That falling down, that failing is more data for you for the next time you take a step. And so to kind of look down upon people when they don't do well right out of the gate, I think is really doing a disservice to the local innovation ecosystem, because there are people who have really good ideas that may fail for reasons that are totally beyond their control, right? Could you imagine creating the world's greatest travel app and then the next week Corona happened, right? Like there's nothing that you did wrong. Maybe you were just unlucky. And for us to kind of look at those people and say, hey, you did this wrong, when really we should be celebrating them, going, I'm glad that you went out there and tried, right? And you didn't get it this time, but you might get it the next time.
Yeah, I always say that innovation is a combination of good idea, good execution, and good timing. So sometimes you may have, like you said, a great idea, a great execution, but really poor timing. And in other times, you might be in the right time, but have a poor execution and so on. So everything has to align for you to succeed. That's why it's important to have a pipeline of innovations, even for companies, to not discourage if something isn't working now. We've tried for 6 months, this stuff is not working. You need to have a continuous pipeline of innovations until you nail it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, companies, products, people, right? We all go through these life cycles. And when products and services first start out, they are not profitable, right? Because you're going out there, you're experimenting, you're adding or removing features, you're exploring markets. You end up spending far more money than these products bring in. And then at some point, it starts to catch on, right? And you see that growth, and it really isn't that profitable, but at least there's some positive cash flow. And then as that matures, you see the growth kind of tail off. And this is where companies kind of focus on efficiency of how long can we keep the cash coming in before at some point the product and service is dead and they have to kill it. The challenge is that I think companies catch on to one idea, one product, one service, and they try to ride it as long as possible without knowing that at some point, this product is going to go away, right? There are very few businesses that have been around for more than 50 or 100 years, right? Other than banks, I can't really think of maybe Coca-Cola, and everything else has gone bankrupt, right? And there are new products and services in to replace the things that those companies used to do. So if a company wants to start thinking about their 5, 10, 15-year time horizon, then they need to have a series of products and services at different points in these life cycles. And so to your point, there needs to be a constant pipeline of innovation because we don't know what's going to work and what doesn't. And it's really about, there needs to be something ready to go pretty much all the time of, hey, it's time to launch a new product, it's time to launch a new service, and have it not require 5 years of R&D, but say, this is ready to go. Jane has been over here working on this project and she is ready to launch, and then we'll find out whether or not it works. And if it doesn't, then behind Jane is Jill, and she has a product and a service, and it's ready to go. So you really do kind of need this continuous pipeline to maintain the health of a business.
Now, as we move towards the end of our episode, I would also like us to move with our discussion a bit towards even a more practical advice, as into how can companies really innovate? Because maybe in theory they know what they should do, but how they should do it. And there are a lot of models out there. Build your innovation laboratory, have on-off innovation teams, have an innovation person in each department, do open innovation, collaborate with startups, you name it. There are so many models out there. I mean, it's of course can be overwhelming to even think about starting developing your innovation capability. What's your take on that? How is there a best practice, or is it something that each company needs to discover?
It's both, right? I think that all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And for a company that finds itself, truly without any innovation whatsoever, then you can probably pick any particular framework off the shelf, and it will be an improvement over what you have right now. But when we really get down to it, at the core of innovation is not necessarily seeing what no one else has seen, but thinking what no one else has thought. And in order to cultivate that inside of a company, you need to make sure that you have, the right mindset, the right tool set, and the right skill set so that people who have this inclination to go out and innovate don't find themselves restricted internally. Right? I think that a lot of companies, and most of the time it's the business people who are focused on, reducing risk or, accounting or whatever, and they actually are internally stopping their innovators from doing what it is that they naturally would. So I think this has been a long way to answer your question. I'm not entirely sure that there is one right way. I think that this is going to vary depending on the company, but the general idea is these people probably that you have inside of your company, these 3 to 5% of innovators want to do this. You really just need to get out of their way and give them the time and the space and the tools that they need to go and work on something, and to not, expect them to have positive cash flow, within the first few months, but certainly positive learnings, right? Here are the things that we went out and we tried. We, addressed a new market. We launched a new product or service, and this is what we learned, right? And it's the idea of, can you adapt to the changing business environment? Because it's changing all around us all the time.
Well, you are rather new to the European market. I'm going to give you another barrier that I get from talking to some companies who say, but we are innovators. We innovate. Me as a user or a consumer or whatever, I see that they are not innovating, or at least to my perception, that's not innovation. And when you get down to a more serious discussion or into the data and ask, okay, how are you measuring innovation? How much in your business is innovation? And you get the answer, everything we do, it's innovation. You pretty much know that it's not quite right how they measure or what they consider innovation. I think that's also a way to protect themselves from starting to truly innovate. How would you respond to such an answer?
Yeah, that is an interesting response. And I'm in agreement with you that if a company tells me, everything we do is innovative, then I think that they're full of BS, right? There is no company out there that is perfectly innovative. And this just could be mostly marketing, right? Like it's almost like saying, hey, we're green. And not being green, right? It's that kind of greenwashing. I don't know that it's helpful for companies to say, you know what, we're not innovating. It's certainly not helpful externally, but not being able to kind of understand where they are, understand their challenges, they're going to have a very, very hard time addressing those if they think that everything that they're doing is already innovative. Right? It's a bit funny to me because no one really knows what's going to happen, right? I don't have tomorrow's newspaper. And so to carry yourself in such a way that you're like, oh, I've got this all figured out. I'm like, I don't think so, right? I think step one is admitting you don't know, and that's okay. The whole point of kind of this innovation journey is let's go find out, right? And you can read about stuff in the books, or you can spend all day, like me on a PowerPoint building a deck, but I don't really know until someone gives me feedback. And that's what I think a lot of companies are struggling with, whether here in Europe or honestly, even in the US, is there's a lot of great ideas, but they're not really put into action because people are afraid that they're going to get a negative response. And that ultimately is ending up holding them back.
Dan, thank you so much. This has been an extremely interesting conversation with many, many valuable insights from you. Just to summarize, I noted down a few ideas for our listeners. You mentioned the importance of skill set, tool set, and mindset as 3 areas for companies to invest in. I also heard about the importance of pipeline, as we don't have tomorrow's newspaper and we cannot surely say what is going to work and what not. So a continuous pipeline of innovations is going to help companies launch products and services on time. Another point that you mentioned was getting your ideas out there, facing customer. This is the only way you will know if what you are building has meaning, has value, and has potential. Any other thoughts then for our listeners, something to get them thinking, maybe in their quiet time or over the weekend?
Yeah, right. Everyone spends their weekends thinking about innovation. Well, maybe that's just me.
And me.
It's honestly, I mean, when we talk about the mindset, the tool set, and the skill set, that really is just the beginning, right? This is building what I would call the innovation infrastructure that all companies need. Where they go from there is going to depend on the circumstances that they're in, the people that they have, and the business that they're in. But these 3 common items, I think, are intrinsic to any company becoming more innovative, right? Changing the way that your rewards work so that you celebrate people trying stuff, right? Making sure that you don't have processes or things that are standing in people's way. And then also, actively recruiting the people who might be thinking a little bit differently than your typical employee. Because if you want something new, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been quite an interesting conversation. For me, the time just flew by. Thank you again for being in this episode, and you are so much welcome to our next episodes. I would really like to hear your thoughts on many other innovation topics.
Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you.